Hello.
Hello.
It's
Is
been a
this
couple
my
months since we
on?
last were here.
Seems like forever ago.
Indeed.
Well, with that,
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, like and subscribe and all the engage with our brands. Yeah. Well, we want to sell you your hopes and dreams back if you just subscribe to our course for $10,000 a person.
Accurate.
I feel like we're at peak influencer scams, or maybe we can go higher, but it seems like everything is these like weird things where if you just join my mastermind group, I'll teach you the secret.
The problem with your pitch, Andrew, is you have to make people answer like 30 questions in a row, and then you tell them that they have to join. And only after they give you their email and all their contact information do you tell them it costs
The
$10,000.
credit card. The credit card that will not be charged until it is.
It's a free webinar. It's a free webinar that's mostly content free.
Could be AI generated.
I mean, I think that's the next wave, is it will just be AI on AI violence.
If people can't be bothered to write the content, why should people be bothered to read it?
It's true.
I never learned to read anyway. So since we last talked, and very recently, you added a new prefix.
Yeah, so
And then you added a new, we'll call it a suffix.
I did. I finished my PhD. Sasha, what did you do?
Well, this is actually a second time I've ventured to change my last name. So, it's not like I haven't made this mistake before. This time you legitimately cannot spell it. Like no one will ever be able to spell my last name anymore. So you can congratulate me on that. And I did it voluntarily. So
I mean, does that count as a password for most
it.
websites?
I can't even pronounce it. So
that is also true. It's not pronounced in a way that you expect it to be pronounced, which is true of most Polish names.
So on the theme that is recurring in a lot of our adventures, the interplay between the org chart and the funding model. One of the things that you're talking about, I think it's fascinating to see like how we kind of like never really solved the fundamental problem of getting everyone in the line to what they could and should be doing to make the most of the organization. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the unfunded pillars?
Yeah, so this is a new talk, and it's kind of been brewing in my head due to some conversations that we had internally for the last year or so. So it was funny. I gave it 2 different DevOps days. One version was 5 minutes, and the other was 50. So it was like generate drastically different flow of content, talking about these ideas. But it was like I had a good experience. I think the problem is very relatable, right? So like I got a lot of good feedback from people being like, I can feel this, like I know exactly what you're talking about, right? But I feel like
you see this scar on my chest,
right? But I think the interesting part is like, how do we help people solve this problem, right? So I'm giving this talk a couple more times in the next couple weeks, and then I would like to continue sort of refining the ideas. But I think the 3 unfunded pillars, and it's not like they are totally unfunded; they're maybe underfunded, right? Is technical excellence, and then reliability and platform. And then, like, of course, all words are sort of require their own definitions. So technical excellence, the way I'm sort of talking about it, is the opposite of technical debt. So like being able to remediate technical debt, being able to invest in sort of keeping your code up to date and making it as good as possible as we go. is this investment that not a lot of companies are able to make or prioritize. And then reliability is, well, I was going to say reliability is what it sounds like, but it is also kind of a vague concept, right? So like I like to think of reliability as a feature, right? So like your application should be able to do what the users came here for, right? So like if you think of availability as your uptime, right? So like, is my application up and running? Is my availability? Is my application doing what my users expect it to do? Is reliability. So, but it has obviously lots of things that go into it, right? So like, it is your uptime and it is your responsiveness and it is how good the execution of actual like if my site is up and running and it's pretty, but say it has a shopping cart and my users are not able to add stuff to the shopping cart, though I'm not reliable. It doesn't matter if it's up and pretty, right? So there's obviously lots and lots of stuff that goes into reliability. And again, being able to prioritize this, I think, is not something that a lot of people do. So there's this expectation of business that like website or an application will always be up, always be working, right? And then the other
I think
expectation
there's
is
a
like it
lot
will
of
be
little
free.
twisty there's a lot of little twisty rabbit holes and nuance in all of the vocabulary, but the overarching theme for a lot of what I see a lot of the organizations struggle with is the total cost of ownership for delivering against our internal and external expectations is often higher than people have quote unquote budgeted for. And then that gets into this other thing about how do you actually get through those shenanigans that get budgets in the first place.
Right. Um, and I think we talk about this a lot too. Like a lot of software is funded like a project, right? So like you like beginning, end, and here we deliver this thing within this time frame, and then like what happens next, right? And we have moved on from the world where we could just like deliver a piece of software and then it's someone else's problem to where most organizations actually have to run this software in perpetuity and keep updating and maintaining it, but the mindset hasn't switched, right? So we're still funding it in a very peculiar fashion.
Well, I think there's a couple of things that build up to that. So there's, if you just look at software, there's this transition from the software shipped on physical media where operating that software is kind of pushed onto the customer to this as a service world that we live in. But I would actually argue it almost goes back a little farther, looking at the way some of the organizations that we've worked with struggle, that a lot of it's actually rooted before products in just the way people have bought hardware and devices for a long time, without recognizing some of these other dynamics where you have planned for the depreciation and the end of life of that particular device.
And then, of course, we had a philosophical debate on whether software is like hardware and like, you know, how do we treat software depreciation, or does it even occur and is it the same? So, but I do think like we sort of often think of software still as like, well, I built this thing and then it exists forever and doesn't really need to be maintained. And that's kind of the problem here. And then, so platform is probably the vaguest of the three, right? And there's a lot of talk about platforms right now, and I think it's probably the talk about platforms probably gonna die off in favor of talk about AI, right? But although Patrick is now doing a talk on platform for AI, so there's we can both leverage AI for platforms and leverage platform for AI, so there's that. But I think this is like the biggest thing that people potentially struggle with is building and funding a platform, and the distinction between a platform that someone sells you and what you have to build on top of it to be specific to your business and to serve your needs.
Does anyone feel like you can go buy a platform right now?
So like if you have a very like I can my personal website runs on someone else's platform and it's perfectly fine. Like I never need to like worry about how it's running because someone else can operate it. But like this is basically a static website. There's nothing to it. And therefore I don't have any specialized needs, right? So if your needs are not specialized, there's plenty of things you could buy off the shelf, but most big organizations, even smaller organizations, like if your software truly makes you money beyond just being a piece of marketing, you probably have specialized needs.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think like, you know, the Netlify to GitHub personal website thing, which cost how much, Sasha?
0. Well,
Yeah,
depends on what you want to deploy, but yeah, you can
for
have
most
it
people, it's 0. If you get enough traffic, they'll start charging you money, but most people it's 0. Is a perfect example of what it means to be able to buy a platform. What's it worth? Nothing. A normal, like, serves everyone the same amount of value platform is worth nothing nowadays. You can't even charge people to host their websites anymore.
So John Willis said he added a comment. Should we invite him to come in?
Of course, yeah.
Sure.
What was his comment?
Someone who's good at.
He just said hi.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so I think that's, you know, if you think of it that way, that I think one of the things that we try to convince people all the time is that a platform that's worth something is your platform, not an industry platform. It's something you've developed that serves the needs of your organization, both the internal needs and the external needs that create value inside your organization. To the extent that you try to like copy a Google platform or a Heroku platform or whatever, you get exactly as much value as that would provide, which tends to be very little. It's got to be fit for your purposes.
It's not necessarily that it's very little. It's just that the bar for what people need keeps going up. Like the abstraction itself changes. And then like if you think about Heroku as an example, Heroku had a lot of interesting ideas, and there's the propaganda around the 12-factor apps, but Heroku didn't have to deal or didn't keep any promises about security or governance, risk, and compliance. So if you are a single developer and you need to push things into some state that runs them, there's a lot of options for that. When you start to have the complexities of large teams and coordinating them, you need more. And then if you get into something that's regulated, then you need even more. And if you can't keep those promises with the platform, then you're really going to have a hard time, and something's going to give. So you're either going to slow down and not get the benefit of all this investment in the fanciness, or you're going to do the investment to make the rest of the governance, risk, and compliance and that kind of stuff start to get in line with the speed that's possible.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, again, it's the part of what you're describing is kind of the Red Queen problem, right? Like it's not competitive to have the same functions that everybody else has. It might be valuable to the extent that it might create efficiencies and things like that inside your organization, but it doesn't give you any competitive advantage.
This is where the whole like this is just such a namespace collision to even talk about what platforms are, right? So when we're talking about platforms in most of these contexts, you're talking about this kind of internal developer platform that is allowing for the workflows that support software development. But when you look at the big picture and the way people have used platforms, literally everything is labeled a platform, right? So I would say it's John Willis, J Dub. So
Dr. J Blue, the world traveler, and my chess nemesis. It just got me playing chess now, you dirty dog.
Yeah.
So, no, good to
Where are
see
you at,
Sasha.
John?
I'm actually at a networking conference called ONUG in Dallas. So I'm waiting to speak in about a half an hour, and I saw you guys on. I'm like, hey, I'm going to sit in there and just say hola and listen.
Are
But
you
yeah.
are you wearing a Vyshavanka? Is that what's happening? At least it looks
Oh,
like it.
no.
No?
You know,
Okay.
it's funny. Now that I've lost a little weight, I wear these shirts that nobody for the last 30 years have commented about my shirts. And now all of a sudden I'm getting all these compliments on my shirts. It's a weird indirect compliment, but it's really cool. So, yeah, no, I just got my
So
jacket and the shirt.
if you remember when we went war in
Oh,
Ukraine, which year was that? 2019?
oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, no,
Right? And
um,
so
yeah.
tomorrow is Vyshavanka Day. Remember we wore the
Oh,
shirts?
really?
Like
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
the
yeah.
whole thing.
No, no. And you know what happened is Paul bought my shirt, and I always owed him money. And like a year and a half later, I kept every time I run into him, like, you know, I owe you for that shirt. And finally he said, just donate it to like Planned Parenthood or something like that. And I'm like, okay. And I did that. I finally got my debt paid off. So
Nice.
yeah, that was pretty
Nice.
cool. So,
But you all look good in the shirt, so maybe we should wear
I
something
actually
more.
fit. I'll fit into it tomorrow. Yeah, maybe I'll do all my calls tomorrow with that shirt. I still have it. So,
Nice.
but yeah, I dig
So
what you
what
guys talking about platform stuff. It's pretty cool that that it's gone to zero, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to. One thing we talked about, John, was like funding in organizations, and Sasha's been talking about this idea that she's got these 3 different pillars that are unfunded. It's kind of like technical excellence or paying off technical debt. Resilience is often not paid for directly or budgeted for, and the third one is which one, Sasha? I can't remember right this second.
platform?
Platform itself.
reliability. I kind of have the position that these are all related and they're entwined with each other, that you can't really get true reliability without platforms. You're not going to get a good platform without technical excellence, yada yada.
So there's like
You know,
this, it's like as John, when we talk about it, sometimes it's like there's, if you think of the 3 as kind of a complex system as opposed to a stack, like most people do, like you can't just invest in technical excellence and expect a platform. You can't just invest in platforms and expect resilience or reliability. They loop on each other in strange ways. So like the funding mechanism becomes even kind of harder to understand to some extent. You can't just say, okay, we're going to start with technical excellence. And then once we're really excellent, we'll make a platform. Because in fact, like part of being technically excellent nowadays is understanding how platforms work in a way, right? So you can't just kind of fund one or the other.
So right when you joined, we were getting into like, what is it even a platform and how there's all these different namespace collisions. And the point that Jay made about differentiation, I don't think that's necessarily required for you to be successful with your internal developer platform. That's more about this competitive landscape for whatever your quote unquote product platform. But to pull on the thread that John just started, or that we all kind of have been kicking around, and again, we talk about maybe this over and over. So for the listener at home, the practices, like the agile practices, TDD, you have almost no hope of getting adoption of those kind of practices if you don't have something that looks suspiciously like a platform to make adopting those practices easy. And so you see this over and over where you go into these organizations that have been trying to adopt Agile for 20 years now, and they're lamenting their technical debt, and they're lamenting how no one does test-driven development, but they haven't made any investment to make that easy. And then you still have all this schedule pressure and the rest of the things that drive the bad behavior. So if you can't make doing the right thing the easy thing, then you can't expect the right thing to happen, because all those other forces are at play in the process.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's like, and we've talked about this before too. It's the way that context changes, right? So, like when I first started software engineering, when I picked up XP for the first time, we were developing web servers. Like the arguments were about like how to deploy Apache. Did you do it thread based or daemon based, or did you have to develop your own like pure socket based version of a web server and stuff like that? Point being that was the context in which the original Agile stuff was being developed in. The infrastructural requirements were quite minimal. Like we were trying to get very small
Yeah,
things.
I would argue that it predated web at all, but that's
Yeah.
like
But,
even
you know, guys, you know, one of the things I was thinking about a lot, Dave, I went back to try to find, so I'm doing a lot of stuff about like DevOps and generative AI, and like I'm sort of thinking about this potential technical debt tsunami of a proportion that we've never seen before of cloud. But and so I went back to some of the decks that you helped me write when we were at Red Hat about Alicia Guerrero and the constraints, and then your PhD is still in my head, man. I'm like, I can't wait till we talk about it for Friday. But your dissertation, and it really resonated stronger this time than ever about like even as simple as, are we going to SRE generative AI, right? And it gets back to the constraints create flow, right? The Asperger, you know, the Asperger stuff like that. That stuff is like, it means so much more to me now, even than it back then, which is part of, I think, what you've been saying for years is the platform is the constraint that creates the flow.
Yep.
And I think more now than ever, you know, like, hey, what's this crazy guy talking about putting SRE on the generative AI products? Well, do you want 50 different vector databases? Do you want, you know, what if SRE says, we're not going to SRE manage it unless you have two vector, these are the two vector databases, and we're real good at this. And and to be able to explain that through the Alicia, I got to chat with her on like, I know Jabe, you know, so it's kind of cool. Awesome. You've been in my slide deck for years, like, yeah. So no, but I think that to me, there's so much in your dissertation there that can be so relevant of what I think is going to basically just like destroy companies if they don't get their head around what's going to be coming into their enterprises here.
But they'll do it. But they'll do it willingly and with enthusiasm and big budgets.
Yes, but that's what they do. Yeah, because that's what they do. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's just they'll do this normal thing that they do, right? They're going to chase the feature side of the house. They're going to try to figure out all the cool things that they can do or try to do. They're going to fund a bunch of proof of concepts that are going to end up in production and never taken down. And it's just going to be a huge sprawl. And, you know, it's partially because right now, at least from what I can see, a lot of the AI stuff doesn't have like a real direction in a lot of organizations. It's just like, we have to have something. We got to rub the AI on something in here right now in order to like be competitive. But what? And so you just get a lot of this kind of, well, Cambrian explosion type behavior, like lots of different experiments. We're just not very good at culling them. And then, you know, how do you cull them and make sure you are keeping what's valuable to the organization? And then how do you operationalize it and make sure it's sustainable over a long period of time? So not easy.
I think there's two things happening at the same time. Like, one is I'm super excited. Like, I wasn't actually super excited about LLMs when they first came out, but now, like, I think the field has actually advanced a lot in the last however long. Has it been 2 years yet? I don't know. There's just like a lot of good stuff coming out and very exciting. And on the other hand, I do think that we're like either reached or reaching the peak of the hype, and it's just gonna start kind of slowing down. And so, you know, hopefully we get some really great innovative stuff out of it before we sort of head to winter.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there can be any better of a like metaphor for it slowing down than releasing GPT 4.0. Like, wouldn't you at least release GPT 0.1? Like, isn't GPT 0 like saying we didn't make any improvements? This is not even a point change. It's just like, it just seems like, I don't know. They've added a lot of pretty stuff on top of GPT, but I'm not sure it's. I've been particularly impressed by what it can do yet. So maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, again, I don't know if we're going to go into the AI maelstrom. My impression from the demo is that they were trying to show how fast it was because they were getting pushback on speed, but it's actually performing less against. It's performing less well, so it's faster. And there's other people more focused on this than I am, but a bunch of benchmarks, they put it against ChatGPT 4 against the 4.0, and it was demonstrably faster, but also demonstrably less capable for some of the benchmarks.
Yeah.
But
I
it
don't know.
it is crazy, right? Like what we could do with the tools right now.
Yep.
It's just a very different conversation than it was even 6 months ago.
Yeah, I think part of like my reaction, you know, less about AI in specific, but what's happening in relationship to what John's saying is it seems like this new thing has escaped the kind of semantic boundaries of the way that people normally think about how things should happen in IT. I'm not sure that's great. Like it's the people are thinking of it so radically different that we can't think about it in reasonable terms about how to manage it and stuff like that. Instead of breaking it down and thinking, well, it's got a bunch of data, you load it into this specialized database, it's got an interface, it's got like, how do we start wrapping those things in the same types of, like, again, you know, platform capabilities, reliability, APIs, metrics, and measurements that allow us to like actually manage them, because, you know, soon those will become significant concerns. If they're not concerns right now, soon they have to be, because there's just going to be huge amounts of money flowing through those systems, and uncontrolled spends don't seem to last forever in most places.
You don't say. I think one of my arguments related to everything you just said and some of the points that John was making is that the generative tools will elevate the need for operational excellence, because the old problem of something being tossed across the wall, where you have the classic DevOps divide, will be such a deluge, such an avalanche of these things, and now literally no one understands it.
That's right.
At least in the past, for some moment in time, there was probably a developer that had some understanding and some clear intentions about what they were trying to do.
Yep.
As we get farther and farther into the looking glass, then I think that you're going to need people who are able and compensated or aligned to making those systems work more than ever.
Absolutely.
And I think this is a very good point that someone was making. Like, so we already have like above the line, below the line, like, right? The system is already very obscure and a black box in many ways, even though humans built it, right? And then you add AI, which makes new and interesting mistakes, right? It's like, I think it's an unfair, so people are like, well, humans make mistakes, AI makes mistakes, it's fine. I think it's an unfair argument, because if you look at like AI algorithms, right, they create innovative ways to solve problems. That is true, and that's great, but it also means that like a human would not come up with this path, right? Which means that for a human to debug and correct this path is very difficult.
Yeah.
So I think the burden on ops potentially, to your point, increases exponentially, and I don't know that we can get AI to operate the systems either.
Yeah. I mean, I think, that's kind of the technical debt that could be accumulated by using AI to generate code seems relatively obvious on one level, but on a secondary level, it's like, when we say that an AI is like a parrot, it's not just that it's trying to. People using that parrot term aren't just trying to say that AI doesn't think. They're trying to say that it's very good at fooling people into thinking that it thinks. So the problem with that is you read code and you're like, oh, this looks like someone thought about this. How carefully do I really have to read it? Right? It passes all my unit tests. I guess we'll just go for it.
People don't read generally. Like, we all don't have time, right? So if something looks good enough, you just think, it's
but
good
not
to
just
me.
that, but I mean, your boss is paying for you. This thing is supposed to accelerate your productivity. Do you have time to read anymore?
Yeah, or I will be replaced with someone who doesn't read.
I didn't go into the full write up, but this comment was on LinkedIn, and it's this guy Jason that works for American Airlines and does some DevOpsy stuff, and he was commenting that he'd started turning off the Copilot autocomplete stuff, and partly because I mean there's a bunch of like cognitive things, and I'm not sure I agreed with every point they're trying to make, but that's like you're waiting for this thing to complete things in a lot of cases. And you like already know the answer, just like write the answer, right? And so I think there's a lot of exploration that comes out of the next rev, the next year or two of this as people learn where's the right balance in this socio-technical dynamic between the tools and there's no I'm long computers, right? Like there's not going to be less computers, there's not going to be less software, but what it means to build and operate these things will definitely change based on what we've already seen in really the last 6 months or a year.
But that's so interesting to me because it's like what he's describing is the opposite of the way that I think a lot of people, at least in my generation, learned right. So like specifically with compilers and typed based languages, like one of the beauties of having a type-based language and a compiler was you could YOLO your code really fast because the compiler would like point out where the typos were, so you could just go fix them very quickly. So you could kind of like iterate and you'd lean against the compiler to like help you refine the code, and then you'd add unit tests. And so basically the whole point of all of those activities were to make sure you had a safety net so that you could try stuff faster as opposed to slowing down. So it's interesting that people are feeling like now they're moving to a thing where they're waiting for the machine to help them make the decision as opposed to asking the machine if their decisions were correct. It seems like a completely different dynamic.
Because we had deterministic machines, right? So we were the creative part and the machines were the deterministic part. Yep. And now we have non-deterministic machines that, they're probably deterministic in a way, but like we have the creative machine and we have to verify that what the machine does is actually good. Yep. But I think this is like one of the biggest problems is the volume too. Like kind of how we were pointing this out is like, well, there's going to be all this content generated by all these people using AI that can move really, really fast to generate content. And it's like, I think Corey, like I've first seen Corey make this point. Why would people read something that people didn't write, right? Yep. But I think to some extent, like I wonder how much of this is tech specific. So like, if I am in tech, I'm using AI. How many people outside of tech are using AI? Like I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so. Like, go ahead.
In my kind of whatever journey. How many people are still very ignorant of what we kind of take for granted as the whatever wave front of this technology? I don't know what we could call them muggles or whatever, but they like don't seem to really have this pervasive understanding of what's going on. So it's interesting. I think that gets less true as you come into tech, but even in some of the big enterprises, you have conversations where people haven't dabbled with some of these tools. And so it's going to be really interesting to see that transition as more and more, obviously like everyone, and I think this is to the point John was making, that there's going to be like a board level mandate to have an AI strategy. Yep. And it's going to drive all sorts of shenanigans and bad decisions into a bunch of organizations.
But yeah, so this has already happened, right? So like all sorts of people have been appointed, head of AI and stuff, and they must come up with ways to, improve the business with using AI. And
Hakuna Matata. That's like the same thing with every buzzword, right? Like the cloud.
Well, this did happen a lot faster. So this is an interesting curve in a sense because like when cloud came out, it took like 10 years for everybody to get obsessed with the cloud and another 20 years to get unobsessed. I think people are like, we can talk about other technologies to happen with. I think the AI curve has been like pretty insane, right? Because it's like very steep into directly into C-suite. We must have this right now. So
So
it's interesting how. Go
I,
ahead.
I think the other thing that I had two things that I was thinking about. One was kind of a direct response to Andrew's Muggle thing, which I think is interesting, in that one of the differences, like, so when I first made my first websites, I used to have to explain to my customer what a website was. Like, after they had purchased it, I'd go and explain how to use it because they'd never seen one before, right? And so there you have executives spending money on stuff they literally have no understanding of. They're like, someone told me I have to have one of these things. Sure, here's some money, go build it. But this consumerization thing has happened where executives now have real expectations about how technology should work at work because they can experience it at home. They're like, why is it so easy to get on my Wi-Fi at my house and so terrible to get on it at my business? Like, all those contrasts from executives and also from just employees between how things operate inside the organization and how they operate outside the organization end up causing a lot of strange pressures on the organization. So it used to be, in fact, that executives wouldn't really know what good looked like, but now they have a lot of examples of what good looks like. They use it every day. And I suspect because AI is not like the cloud, in that the cloud was mainly an infrastructural thing that was happening behind the scenes. Most people didn't understand it at all because they primarily didn't really interact with it. This AI stuff is going to be like out front, in front of everybody's face. And so the executives are going to have time to play with it and see what it looks like in their real lives. And they're going to bring those expectations back into their organizations to be like, why can't we do this? Like, why can't we have our AI work like this?
I think you're right in the sense that the cloud is more this kind of like unseen thing, but you already had this cognitive dissonance building for years.
Right. Yep.
With the disconnect between what consumer software looks like,
yep,
and what most enterprise software looks like. And that, I think that's what drove the last at least decade of digital transformation investment, is trying to close that gap in most of those enterprise applications.
So I want to bring it back to the unfunded pillars, and that therein lies the problem, right? Because the companies who build the consumer software, which you can use for free, because some people say you are the product. I'm not sure how correct that analogy is, but those people invest very heavily in excellence and reliability and platforms, right? And then you have your standard company trying to build software, internal and external, but they don't realize the levels of investment needed in certain things, right? And I think we were having this conversation a couple of days ago, but the interesting part about this is why is the need for this is clear to someone like a VP of engineering or a similar role, but is not clear to the business owner, to the executive, to the people higher up the chain. What is it that we're missing in our ability to explain what reliability or excellence really mean?
So this is a lot of things, but the business wants everything for free right now, for one, and they don't understand the true cost because they never really had to pay it, and so you end up with a lot of presumptions about how easy it should be, right? Like I don't know how many meetings I've been in where, and sometimes there's reasons why it's harder than it has to be, but like could you just like change this little pixel, or could you just like change this little thing, and the product person or the business person thinks that should be this really easy thing, and maybe if we had the technical excellence investment it would be, but the reality is it's like all these other little janky things that we built the house on are load bearing bugs, right, that we have to go kind of pay down to be able to make that one little pixel change. So getting people to understand that right now, I don't have an easy answer, right? I just think that it's just a hidden cost that if we don't pay it directly, we don't understand it, and we just think, oh, the engineer should be able to do this. It should be so easy because it seems like it would be easy from all the other stuff I see.
I will make a counterpoint. I think it's not about business wants everything for free, right? Because business is going to go pay for AI tools right now, like lots of money, right?
They want them for free, but they will pay.
Yeah, and like there's a lot of things that business is ready to pay for, right? And I think again, the point I'm making in the talk, and of course, like we'd have to go pretty deep into that to make the connections, but like bringing it back to the three economies, which was something that Jabe had worked on, and Jabe, I maybe let you speak to that if you want. We're kind of coming up towards the end of the podcast today, but basically, I think the problem is that it's not easy to explain how these dollars turn from investment into either making money or saving money. Like that's the problem that those foundational things are facing, is that if it was easy to explain how we can make more money through investing in, remediating technical debt, like nobody would have technical debt. That would be like, heaven, right?
Yep. But I think like a really simple way of thinking, at least part of the problem that we have in most organizations is like, let's take the wall of confusion idea, right? The original wall of confusion is this idea that there's a wall between development and operations, and the way that it's, the way it works is developers throw things over the wall to the operators, and maybe operators throw things back over the wall. And they communicate primarily through like ticketing systems and stuff like that. They don't ever directly interact. And in fact, the more they throw things over the wall, the stronger the wall gets, the more reinforced the separation between the two sides gets, because one side is kind of incentivized to make the ticketing system stronger and more detailed in order to prevent bad code from getting into operations, right? So that's kind of like the way you might think about the wall. Well, the wall doesn't just keep code out, it keeps budgets in certain places. So part of the problem is that if you fund the development of features, but you can throw the feature over the wall to someone else's budget for operation, how do you know when you've thrown too many features over the wall? If there's no feedback loop, how do the people on the other side of the wall plan how many features you're going to have? What are they going to do? How do I plan or budget for any of this? And the result of it is that the budgeting in most organizations is on two sides of the wall with no conversation about what we are building and operating. What are you building? What am I operating? I'm going to budget for operations. I'm going to budget for development. So there is no conversation like the DevOps conversation that's happening in the budgeting cycle. There's nothing in there where people are like, oh no, we need to budget for reducing operational load, which will give us more money to develop more features, but we need to develop those features in a way that maintain and reduce the operational load, because that creates a virtuous cycle. And the opposite of the virtual cycle is the wall, and people throwing unfunded mandates over the wall, unfunded features over the wall. They funded the development of it, but they didn't fund the operation of it. No back pressure in the system.
Well, and the back pressure, so like I worry about this at the moment with the amount of layoffs and the amount of like recession, sort of like people losing jobs. Like if it's, in a lot of times in my experience, the back pressure was generated by a couple of people like literally pushing back against the flood of stuff that comes towards operations. And like, if those people are just mostly trying to keep their jobs, like how much back pressure can they generate, and how much feedback will they have? How much can they escalate the fact that there is a problem until it all like basically blows up?
Yep. But all that version of it, the back pressure of in the moment back pressure, that's all remediation. That's not planning. It's not budgeting. It's trying to resist the flow of stupidity through the organization, right? Like in theory, we should be thinking about projects as having development costs and an ongoing operations cost, and we should budget those things and understand those things over a long period of time. And we shouldn't be budgeting quarterly. We should be budgeting, over multiple quarters, and understanding how to do drip funding and things like this in order to understand how to create a budget over a period of time. But we don't see that in most organizations.
I think it's fair to characterize that as stupidity.
Yeah.
And in fact, in many ways, it is locally rational.
Yep.
And optimal given the way that the incentives have been set up for all the different reasons that we've been talking about. So it seems suboptimal to someone who has to pay the cost, but for someone who doesn't have to pay the cost, that can treat it as an external cost, it is perhaps optimally rational decision.
Yep. I mean, it's this I budget for my stuff, they budget for their stuff, as opposed to any sense in which we budget for something, right? Like, that's the problem, it's the othering that literally is happening during the budgeting cycle. That's not my problem. I don't have to figure out how to do that. And, again, that would be fine if there were no feedback loops between those systems at all. But there are feedback loops. It's just they play out over a longer and longer period of time. So, operational debt and technical debt are very closely related to each other. And to the extent that developers can't pay down technical debt, they're creating more and more operational burden at the same time. To the extent they can't pay down operational burden, they are literally forcing themselves to write code in suboptimal ways because they're stuck with systems that can't be modified, right? So, like, these are all feedback loops that only appear to be, separated by, artificial boundaries inside the organization that don't really exist. They're only there as fictions, and that those fictions only work, like you're saying, locally, not just locally in the organization, but temporally locally. They only work for a specific period of time. And so that's where things get really wonky eventually. And you can't, this is Herbert Simon, you can't do complete global rationality either, because there's not enough time to calculate everything. So it's got to be some sort of local. But the question is whether you could do local with appropriate negotiations.
Local in time and space, right? Because we're terrible at causality anyway, but when you separate it in time or space, we get even worse.
Yep. And so multiple local in location and time with ongoing negotiation between them. That's really what we're trying to get to, right? Like, we can't make 5-year plans, but we can't make completely individuated plans either. We got to figure out.
We can make 5-year plans. It's a great way to lose.
Exactly right. Yep.
No, we can't make 5-year plans because Wall Street is on a quarterly cadence. So the only plan we can make.
Yes.
About 3 months.
Cool. Should we come back and hang out like next week, 2 weeks?
On a cadence, have content.
Yeah, that'd be good.
And a strategy.
Yeah.
We need feedback from our audience.
That's right. Exactly.
I think it's locally rational and in our interests, selfish interests, to make more content. I think we would do well to take some of the topics we've been marinating and serve them up properly on our little channel. So
yeah, cool.
So it's not just us talking to each other all the time.
We can talk more about hamburgers in the future.
As fun as that.
I do. We
buy a
will
restaurant.
talk about hamburgers.
That feels like it deserves its own episode.
Absolutely. We should use it as like an ongoing exploration of business management. It'd be great.
So teaser is, I think Andrew said that it's cheaper to buy a restaurant than to get an MBA. So he's going to learn how to develop some business by buying a hamburger restaurant. Is that a correct summary?
That's an accurate representation of at least one version of my stories.
So next up on the Ergonautic podcast, we're going to talk about hamburgers.
Excellent.
All
right, guys. It was fun hanging out. We should do it again soon.
All right.
We'll do it again
Bye,
soon.
everyone.
Stay safe.